Okay. I'm just going to wait. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to wait for everyone to come into the room. Let's see that number just going up. Guys, can you mute your when you're not speaking, your keyboard? Yeah. Thanks. Okay, we seem to have sort of like reached a number of about 65 participants. So I think what we'll do is we'll kick off now. Hello, everyone. My name is Councillor Scott Ainsley. I hope the conference is going really well for you. I'm really missing not seeing you all in person, but it's great to hear what good things are happening around the country. And I hope that you've all been inspired by the speeches from leaders that the better is possible. I hope you saw the incredibly powerful speech that was made by Aziz Minot, the chair of the Greens of Colour, who said the crystal clear message was, there is no social justice without racial justice. There's no economic justice without racial justice. And there's no environmental justice without racial justice. So in order to get on with delivering that vision and that call to action, welcome to this panel discussion on how atonement and reparations for the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved Africans addresses planet repairs. Now, this discussion relates to motion E3, which is page 82 in the conference agenda. A background paper is also on page 108, and we'd like to thank all of those members who have already supported this motion. And many of your questions that have been captured in an FAQs document can be made available to you all. Now, at this conference, we can be the first national party to ask Parliament to establish an all-party parliamentary commission of inquiry for truth and reparatory justice for the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved Africans. Much of the global inequality we see today has its roots in that African Holocaust, or Maangamizi. Much of Britain's wealth was built on the back of millions of Africans it enslaved for over 270 years through a system that drove the country's industrialization and modernization, laying the bedrock for the development of an extractivist capitalist economy that still endures today. And a key part of that continuation was the passing of the 1837 Slave Compensation Act, which allowed the enslavers, not the enslaved, to receive compensation amounting to 40% of the Treasury's annual income in that year. Now, people were appalled to note that this debt was not fully repaid by British taxpayers until 2015, allowing the bulk of the wealth of slavery to remain in the hands of powerful elites and their institutions in both the former colonies and in the UK. And we deplore a situation where the beneficiaries of the genocide and ecocide of African people and their environments, including many institutions and families in the UK, continue to benefit, but have not made reparations, while the descendants of the enslaved continue to suffer racism, discrimination, and inequality. Now, one of the most visible and enduring legacies of African enslavement, colonization, and neo-colonialism is systematic racism that exists within Western societies, which the Pan-Afrikan Liberation Movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, the International Decade for People of African Descent Coalition UK, and other organizations within the Black communities are campaigning to eliminate. The legacy of slavery is responsible for ingraining racial inequality within Western society that manifests itself both in overt acts of violent racism, such as the death of George Floyd at the hands of American police, Black deaths in police, prison, psychiatric custody, and immigration detention in the UK, or in institutional failings to provide sufficient support and care for Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities, such as the disproportionate impact that COVID-19 has had on them in the UK. We are 6 years into the UN International Decade for People of African Descent, and it is shameful that this has still not been officially recognised by the UK government. But this nonetheless offers a window of opportunity to do something real, to address the enduring legacies of slavery and colonialism. If Britain can own up to and properly address the legacies of its colonial and enslaving past, then it can truly deal with the root causes of our country's socio-economic inequality rooted in systematic racism, while linking this to a need for planet repairs. By engaging in a genuine process of reparative and transitional justice, we can begin to heal holistically and rebalance the past and present injustices inflicted by the few, which causes endless suffering to the many. And at a global level, it is mainly the richer nations of the global north and the so-called developed world, such as Britain, that have caused and continue to cause disproportionate harm to our planet and its ecosystem. Yet it is the global south and the so-called poorer nations that are suffering the most from climate and ecological breakdown. Colonialism created unequal terms of trade that have contributed to uneven economic development. For example, the United Kingdom's per capita output of carbon dioxide remains almost 10 times that of former colonies such as Ghana and Nigeria, and around double that of Jamaica. The United Kingdom's gross national income remains over 8 times that of Jamaica and around 20 times that of Nigeria and Ghana. This never-ending cycle of division, socio-economic imbalance, extractivism, and exploitation by the few has to stop. Let us not be divided so that the elites continue to rule. There is hope when we work together. Now, there are companies and institutions who are looking to make reparations for the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved Africans, such as Lloyd's of London, Green King, Glasgow University, to name just a few. The government has said it's going to set up a commission to address inequality in British society, but it needs to do far more. And that is why the Greens of Colour, the Young Greens, and members are bringing this motion to conference. We are proud to support the Stop The Maangamizi, We Charge Genocide, Ecocide campaign and others in calling on our government to commit to a holistic process of atonement and reparations in accordance with the United Nations Framework on Reparations, while simultaneously addressing the solutions to acts of ecocide arising from the climate and ecological crises. I will now like to hand over to our first guest, Esther Stanford-Xosei, to explain more about the UN framework and planet repairs. Esther is a Jurisconsult, reparations scholar, activist, emerging historian of the International Social Movement for African Reparations, and Coordinator General of the Stop The Maangamizi, We Charge Genocide, Ecocide campaign. She was brought into this world by parents who were born in Abya Yala, South America, and the Caribbean, Barbados and Guyana, yet who retained their genetic and cultural memory of Africa. Esther's activism has sought to remember the historic, geopolitical, and cultural ties between diaspora communities and their ancestral motherland, Africa, in African people's quest for liberation, self-determination, and holistic reparatory justice. Esther, I'll hand over to you. Thanks.
Thank you for that introduction, and it's great to be here in this session. I know that time is short, so I'll just crack on. And I need to share my screen so that you can also see what I can see. Okay, so hopefully you should all be able to see the presentation that will be jointly delivered by myself and Kofi Mawuli, who has joined me. Okay, so moving swiftly on. Too fast. What is the meaning of reparations? Simple question, but we always have to ask it because in popular discourse, in mainstream media representations, reparations is always kind of reduced to being compensation. And it's made equivalent to compensation, whereas compensation is only an aspect of reparations. But it's important because we are in Black History Month to recognize that this history of championing reparations is ancient. It's an ancient principle, and African law has always recognized a right to reparation. And one of the earliest kind of frameworks on reparations that recognize reparations is in the Mandé Charter of 1222, the Mandinka Declaration of Human and People's Rights. And this was a judicial text that predated the Magna Carta and the English Bill of Rights, and it recognizes the need for reparation where there is damage to a life, okay, harm caused. Also important to recognize that we have a movement that some of us refer to as the International Social Movement for African Reparations, which is actually part of a wider internationalist movement called the PRIM, the People's Reparations International Movement. And that is basically everybody else's reparation struggles who are not African people. But the ISMAR, which is the International Social Movement for African Reparations, is global and it has a global leadership. And again, the mass media tend to focus on particular leaders, whether they're from the Caribbean or what have you, but actually there's a whole global leadership that are not always focused on. And when we're thinking about what has been done on reparations, we have to factor in all of the efforts. So the top pictures we have are contemporary leaders, and the bottom row are people who have moved on into the ancestral realm. Again, many of whom that we commemorate and remember, especially in Black History Month, were actually reparationists. Moving on. So the key framework on reparations is the United Nations framework, and it is known as the Basic Principles and Guidelines on the Right to a Remedy and Reparation for Victims of Gross Violations of International Human Rights Law and Serious Violations of International Humanitarian Law. And according to this framework, which was codified in 2005, we refer to it as soft law, in that it is, if you like, the consensus that has been agreed and adopted by members of the United Nations organization as the minimum standards, if you like, that we will respect and implement and work towards in regards to reparations. Now, in the UN framework, there are 5 key aspects. Again, people always jump to 3, which is compensation, but actually we're going to start with the first one, which is a cessation of violations, assurances and guarantees of non-repetition. Then there's restitution, there's compensation, there's satisfaction, and there's rehabilitation. Okay, so I'm going to say a bit more about each of them. So restitution refers to measures which restore the victim, and don't be alarmed by that word victim here. In a legal sense, when we use the word victim, we basically mean a category of persons who are either individuals or collectives in terms of communities, peoples or nations, who have a right to a remedy and who have been harmed and therefore come to law and equity for justice. So restitution is about restoring the victim to the original situation before the gross violations of their rights occurred. Now, in the context of African heritage communities, we're talking about enslavement, in the form of chattel slavery, colonial slavery or colonialism, and modern day neo-colonialism or neo-colonial enslavement. And collectively, in the Stop The Maangamizi campaign, we refer to this as the Maangamizi, which is a key Swahili term that refers to the intentionality of what happened to us, genocides, war crimes, crimes against humanity in this continuum of chattel, colonial and neo-colonial forms of enslavement. And the quest for restitution is not just about people. So it does also involve a remedy where there's been damage to our environment, genocide, ecocide, okay, or cultural ecocide, as some may know it as. That is also something that we can factor in under restitution. So where possible, it's about the restoration of our environment and everything that sustains us. Reconstruction of infrastructure, replacement of community facilities, reimbursement of expenses of relocation, wherever such harm results in a dislocation of a community, which is happening a lot with land grabs today. But restitution also speaks to a restoration of a group's human rights, their people's rights, their identity, their culture, their heritage, a right to a family life, employment opportunities, or restoration of lost employment opportunities in terms of status, as well as property. And one of the key aspects of restitution are actually the right to a liberated homeland and the right to return and to have a citizenship known as repatriation, but we actually say rematriation, which is something that has been championed by many back to Africa movements, including Rastafari. So compensation, I'll just touch on, because people often think compensation, again, is just about money. But compensation relates to a wide range of measures, and it requires that wrongdoers pay damages to persons, communities, collectives harmed by the past conduct of whoever has harmed them for any economically accessible damage that is proportional to the gravity of the violation. So we can't just use the word enslavement, and because it's not a singular experience, we'd have to then go and categorize all of the violations of rights, okay? And look at how would we put an economic value on that? How do we put an economic value today on anti-Black racism and its specific form of Afrophobia in terms of employment discrimination? And some people have tried to do that, and there are various studies. So compensatory reparations authorize the payment of damages for physical, political, psychological, economic, and other harm suffered, okay? But in the International Social Movement for African Reparations, we recognize the UN framework, which we refer to as an operational framework, but we also work with what's known as the conceptual framework, which is something that was advanced by Professor Chimwezu in 1993. And Chimwezu reminds us that really a key aspect of repair is self-repairs. So the restoration of self-determination of a group who have been denied their self-determination. And that includes mental repairs, psychological, spiritual, cultural, social, political repairs, economic, institutional, organizational, educational, family repairs, relationship repairs, both within communities, but also intra-community repairs. Repairs in a community's self and group understanding and their status in the world. Repairs to a group's sense of dignity, so what's known as dignity restoration, value and worth, and repairs to the reputation in terms of the reputational harm that communities have suffered as a result of being labeled as just slaves, that term. But when we talk about planet repairs, then a lot of people think, what is this planet repairs? Planet repairs are holistic repairs again, And they build on the Chimwezu framework, which is very much people-centered, to then look at the wider dimensions of looking at people and planet. So Chimwezu framework, including ecological repairs, cosmos repairs, and other forms of repair. That's what we're talking about. So it's linking the damage that has been done to a people, but also looking at the harm that also accompanied that in terms of our environment, our Mother Earth, and ultimately the cosmos. Okay, so in terms of the need for reparations, it's clear there's a need for reparations today, and this is a quote from the Abuja Proclamation of 1993, that the damage sustained by African peoples is not a thing of the past. You often hear, yeah, but slavery happened hundreds of years ago. That's not what we're talking about. We're actually talking about what's going on today and linking that back to chattel enslavement. But it's painfully manifested in the damaged lives of contemporary Africans from Harlem to Harare, in the damaged economies of the Black world from Guinea to Guyana, from Somalia to Suriname. And that then also fits with Human Rights Watch. They came up with a position on reparations in 2001 in the lead up to the Third World Conference Against Racism that was held in Durban, South Africa. And they point out that when talking about reparations for relatively old wrongs, they would focus on people who can reasonably claim that today they personally suffer the effects of past human rights violations through continuing economic or social deprivation. And they say the group would also have to show continuing harm to itself from those past abuses. And we in the campaign, the Stop the Maangamizi campaign, refer to the Maangamizi, and the colourful image that you can see gives some manifestations of that Maangamizi today. The report, Britain's New Colonialism, that was released by War on Want and others in 2016, told us about the 101 companies, extractive companies, registered on the London Stock Exchange that control over $1 trillion worth of Africa's key commodities. So again, showing that we're not talking about colonialism or even chattel slavery of the past. This is about what's going on today and the destruction and damage to our environment that these companies are causing. Just recently, there was this report tackling illicit financial flows for sustainable development in Africa that was released, and it gives those statistics there, those figures there in terms of the $89 billion a year that is lost in illicit financial flows. And between 2000 and 2015, illegal capital leaving Africa totaled $836 billion. And these are just a few studies. There's actually, a lot more that we don't have time to go through. In the Stop the Maangamizi campaign, we also refer to genocide and ecocide. And people often think, well, genocide's a bit strong. We're actually just following on from what African people in America did with the historic 1951 We Charge Genocide petition, and we've updated it. But a key thing to note about genocide, Dr. Raphael Lemkin, who coined the term genocide, taught us that genocide has two phases. One, the destruction of the national pattern of the oppressed group. And second, the imposition of the national pattern of the oppressor. And when he's talking about a national pattern, he's referring to the institutions that a community has in healthcare, in education, in terms of spirituality, culture, industry, how it sustains itself from one generation to the next. So genocide, even according to the 1948 Genocide Convention, does not involve the total annihilation of a group. Google it and read it for yourself. We also have to recognize reparatory justice within the context of collapse. And the Institute for Leadership and Sustainability defined collapse as the uneven ending of our current means of sustenance, shelter, security, and identity in terms of the climate and ecological crisis. And of course, this placard here that we carried on the 2019 African Emancipation Day Reparations March, no reparations on a dead planet. So we have to look seriously about the environmental dimensions of any reparations remedy. So I'm moving on now to welcome Kofi Mawuli, who will take us forward in looking at some of the things that we have been proposing as a campaign. We have some main tools, one of which is the Stop The Maangamizi petition. And the petition includes two key milestones: the establishment of the All-Party Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry for Truth and Reparatory Justice, which we refer to by acronym as the APSITAJ, as well as international tribunal known as the Ubuntu Gotla People's International Tribunal for Global Justice. So Kofi will talk to us more about why the need for an APSITAJ, and there's some slides that I will probably be showing during his presentation. So I'm now going to hand over to Kofi. So we're just going to do a little bit of shifting, bear with us. It'll be right in front of it.
Okay. Just while you make yourself comfortable, Kofi, Esther, thank you very much for explaining the UN framework and what is meant by planet repairs. Just while you're settling down, I'm going to introduce Kofi Mawuli, Jurisconsult, Pan-African Community Advocate for Global Justice and Joint Coordinator, Extinction Rebellion Internationalist Solidarity Network. I asked what drives Kofi, who's been fighting against injustice all his life, and he says, what drives me is our ancestral Pan-African global justice vision of Ma'at Ubuntu Nonyansa. You can say that properly for me, Kofi, in a second. And an uncompromising, soul-deep and total zero tolerance for injustice anywhere on and beyond our Mother Earth. Kofi, it's over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Comprehensively dealt with what reparatory justice.
Kofi, wherever the microphone is, can you speak into it? Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
So we don't lose you. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So Sister Esther has, comprehensively dealt with the basics of grasping what reparations from our Pan-African perspective really means. Because the All-Party Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry for Truth and Reparatory Justice, APSITAJ, is a major demand of not just the international social movement for African reparations, but also those of our colleagues, allied peoples, also organizing from non-African communities who make up the People's Reparations International Movement. I would like to look at the practicalities of the APSITAJ. First of all, why something like an APSITAJ is a central demand. It is within that connection that I would like to state very clearly that for us in the Stop The Maangamizi, Charge Genocide, Ecocide campaign, our cause of Pan-African reparatory justice has been formulated and is being battled for in such a way that we can catalyze all communities across the world, the entire humanity, to also take up the cause of reparatory justice, particularly in its planet repairs meaningfulness at this time as pertains to their own case. We have not had a true telling of history, particularly the history that we have all actually written together. The elites across the world have forced upon us a narrative of the few that completely disorientates, and disempowers the many, because true history is that which masses of peoples have written, and very often in harmony together. Reparatory justice, particularly in our Pan-African conception and waging of the campaign for it, is one that will enable all of us to come together and reclaim our common humanity, but more importantly at this time with the climate and ecological crisis wreaking havoc, not only in the global south, but threatening to do similar things in the global north. It is important that we embrace reparatory justice in its planet repairs meaningfulness, in which case I would like to remind us that here in this country, where the likes of Thomas Spence, born 1750 in Newcastle, died here in London in 1814, who founded the Spencean Society, and whose members are some of the heroic figures of history making in Britain, where his case for common ownership of land and an alternative way to the development of Britain, based rather on respect for the environment, where his case taken up, we would not be here with the climate and ecological crisis. So the archetype is fundamentally an opportunity for African people across the world and African descendants to be given a hearing by the British Parliament, this so-called mother of all parliaments, for each and every African organization, each and every African community that would like to have its case for reparatory justice heard in terms of what intergenerationally it has endured, to present their case to a commission of the British Parliament, through which everybody in Britain and across the world can hear from not just one particular voice, not even that of the Stop The Maangamizi campaign, not of the Black Lives Matter movement, but hear each and every African on this planet tell their intergenerational family story of what chattel enslavement, colonization, and neo-colonialism and their crimes of genocide and ecocide, what it has meant for us. But also an opportunity, and this is extremely very important, also an opportunity for those non-African allies, including those here in Britain, who have suffered tremendously from standing together with us as African people through our Maangamizi phases of chattel enslavement, colonization, and now neo-colonialism. Many of whom also were made to lose their lives. Some were hung, drawn, and quartered in the name of the British Crown, right? And that is what has been erased completely out of British history, replaced by lifting up the lives of Churchill and Maangamizi criminals, in terms of the statues you have all around you, and burying the history of the people who actually made Britain, very proud. Of Britain, a country that we can all say the entirety of humanity, the best of humanity, contributed to shaping what the true history of Britain is like, which is buried from particularly present generations who are mostly ignorant about this. So this hearing, which in itself will be part of the reparations process. This is what is important, that the hearing itself has to give us African people and everybody else the opportunity to hear the truth and let the truth begin to heal us. And it is that courage to hear our people talk their truth. Many of our ancestors had their tongues pulled out, right? In order, to prevent them from telling this truth, right? Even our means of communication, like drums and the Akoben or the Abeng in the diaspora, were silent for us not to tell our story. The reparatory justice, stopping the harm, begins with giving us a hearing. It is not for those even who may have good intentions to say that they want to help address this issue, who want to say that they want to offer us reparations in whatever form they think it is. It is not for them to determine what we need without even hearing the full story. In fact, some of these so-called reparations offers are to silence us, to corrupt us, to bribe the greedy few who literally are their agents amongst us, who have let neocolonialism thrive and continue to kill our people across the world. These are the people they want to call forth by these carrot sticks of fake reparations that mean absolutely nothing. And the fact that universities like the so-called University of the West Indies and a state organization like CARICOM are actually interested in this kind of fake reparatory gimmicks does not mean that the masses of our people over generations that have spilled so much blood, that have battled from one generation to the other, should now settle for this kind of piecemeal nonsense that is being offered to derail not the reparatory justice struggle, not only of our African communities of reparatory justice interests, but that are within the what we call the ISMAR, the International Social Movement for Afrikan Reparations, but all other peoples, particularly indigenous communities of resistance that have also been fighting for reparatory justice all along, and those who represent families of people who have suffered here in this country by standing on our side as allies. They all must have their stories told. And for that process of telling the story, to be an essential part of the reparatory justice measures that need to be carried out. And we hope this can be done through, for example, what some of us are calling the Mathemasi action learning test hearings, whereby various groups of people, be they young people in our communities, the elderly, be they students on their campuses, be they people who are of various faiths in their churches and mosques and shrines, can start practicing how to tell and listen to these stories. Mathemasi is an Lingrat symbol of the Akan in West Africa, which simply means learn to listen and hear, right? And it is important that in this we learn to listen, because one of the difficulties for many, in societies and racialized as white, is their difficulty in simply quietly listening to what we have to say. Very often they want to tell us what to think, and they have to, to tell us how to speak, so that we say only the things that please them, the things they want to hear from us, the things that make them comfortable. Our ancestors from one generation to the other, to the majority of our people today, are not comfortable with the crimes of chattel enslavement. They are not comfortable with the genocide and ecocide of colonization. They are not comfortable with the heinous crimes of neocolonialism that today are wrecking the havoc of the climate and ecological crisis west upon our people. So we must all learn to listen to each other. And that's the discipline of learning to listen and hear what people say, not hear what you want to hear, but hear what people are saying is very important. And in this, we hope that the Green Party will continue to brave itself and its membership to play a leading role in British society, on these issues. It is important at this time that if you talk to the vast majority of people in our African heritage communities, they clearly, the Labour has lost their confidence. There's no way you can look to parties like the Conservatives, who are clearly on a pathway to promoting eco-fascism as a response to the climate and ecological crisis. And in fact, one would say with the connivance and abetment of certain sections of the Labour Party and the mainstream political parties, the language that's being used, by the mainstream political parties in response to the climate and ecological crisis is that of eco-fascism, right? And we should make no mistake about it. If anybody does it, check how fascism, rose up in Germany, right? And therefore we have to be very clear. Our people need, if the faith will be restored in electoral politics, then our people need an electoral alternative. The possibility is that the Green Party can be that one. But reparatory justice, particularly as a planet repairs meaningfulness, offers an opportunity to together build this real alternative.
Kofi, thank you very much for making that extremely passionate plea for this support, and for acknowledging the difficulty that other parties might have, but the bravery that we hope to show by passing this motion at conference. We've generated quite a lot of chat. So if you don't mind now, I'm going to pass over to, I'm going to have some of the questions that have come in. Let you, Esther, Kofi, or Cleo, our very own councillor Cleo Lake, who's an artist activist and former Lord Mayor of Bristol, is also our panelist. But we're going to take some questions now. It says here that the speakers have spoken about the reparations for past and present oppression eloquently, but the link between this past and present oppression and our joint oppression of future generations is tenuous. To me, this is the much longer oppression. That's from Chit Chong. If someone could think about answering that question. Just a quick question from John Fuller was, what are Cosmos repairs? That I think was mentioned in your section, Esther. Could we just quickly take those two questions, and then we've got more questions coming in. Thanks very much.
Okay, sorry, we're doing some musical chairs here. I'm going to take the first one about reparations past and present. If I understand the question correctly, and the link between the different phases being tenuous. I mean, we've had a limited time to do a presentation today. We cannot make out all the arguments in the limited time that we have to show the links. I mean, there's so much advocacy, scholarship, research that shows the links, and we would have to go through a very clinical kind of breakdown of different aspects of the Maangamizi to show that. But I think that a lot of people, a lot of researchers are producing this research now in every field, whether we're talking about modern day economies, whether we're talking about the link between climate injustice today and in those areas where we're seeing those the gravest manifestations, showing the historical connections with chattel slavery, whether we're talking about intergenerational trauma and oppression, that there is so much. So I think we would really do justice to that question. We would have to have a proper session where the person breaks down what it is precisely they think is a tenuous link. And as I said, that it's not only about the African experience that has been globalized, it's about the link that has had with other communities who have experienced colonization and dispossession, especially indigenous peoples. So many of us, we might not use the word reparations, but are coming to this point of convergence. So Kofi is going to answer the one on cosmos repairs.
Before I go to that one, may I say, I am from the Ewe Fon Aja communities of Beto resistance in West Africa. And we have a saying that it simply means it is upon the old that you weave the new. And I want to ask, where will Britain be today without chattel enslavement of African people, without the colonization of millions of indigenous peoples in their own homelands, without this empire, the symbols of which are still celebrated because they are meaningful to Britain up till today? Where will the families and the money that they've extorted from the enslavement of our people, that was done past, many years past, centuries past, but Britain continues to be what it is and grow upon those crimes against humanity? Why deny the crime, responsibility for the crimes, when generations upon generations of people in this country continue to thrive on those ill-gotten gains, while the descendants of those people continue to suffer in poverty, right? This is, the answer is buried in that. Now, in terms of cosmos repairs, we are at a point when, with human beings beginning to go into space, following interest in space and what exists beyond our planet, that even if you go into ancient Egypt of thousands of years ago, our African ancestors built pyramids and great wonders of African civilization, knowing what existed, in the cosmos. They never sought harm for the cosmos. Today, in the same way that colonization, and enslavement was an enterprise of private merchants backed by the monarchies in Europe, we are having private business people like even Richard Branson, right, being encouraged to make going into space a private enterprise, and to do the same harm that they've done to planet Earth, into other planets, right? And so already the long-standing relationship of respect by various people on the planet for what exists beyond our planet, respect for Mother Earth, and respect for all the other celestial bodies that exist. We still have capitalism, in the hands of a few, beginning to destroy that sacred relationship. And Cosmos Repairs is meant to address that.
Okay, Kofi, thank you very much. So some of the other questions coming in have said there's a lot of sympathy, with what's being said. A lot of people, someone on the chat was saying that I cannot be blamed for the sins of my father. What can we do to be better in the future? Someone is asking in the Q&A, so what sort of structural changes are required? It's a message from Les, especially by institutions that have gained from neo-colonial plunder. And what sort of practical structural changes do you want to answer to that?
I'll start with as simple as the rest. I can continue. You don't want to be blamed for the sins of your fathers. Hand back the stolen wealth, and let's see where you will be.
So, in terms of reform of institutions, there's a huge amount that has been done. The slide I put up in the beginning that showed in the international social movement for African reparations, it's an intergenerational movement. And so many different people of African heritage across the world have been contributing to these repairs, including institutional repairs. So there's a big move amongst people who are development economists, who are looking at reform of the World Bank, the IMF, using a reparations framework, especially the UN framework on a right to a remedy and reparations. There are many talking about we need new models of governance, even Extinction Rebellion that's calling for political repairs, and the need for a people's assembly is part of that. I mean, in truth, we cannot do justice to this topic in the limited time that we have. So we can only touch on aspects of it, but there needs to be a deeper exploration and study, as there would be for any other persons or communities in justice process, and how they have been seeking to be part of the repair.
Another question that has come in, thank you for that, is who are our allies in this fight for reparations? How best to win it? And a question from Chichong is that whilst the North is clearly more responsible than the South for the latter, we're all responsible for this oppression, even if the historic wealth of the North, based partly on historic pillage of the South, is the lever by which much of this is done. The historic and present oppression and genocide of Africa and other indigenous populations, should we not separate this from the oppression and genocide of people in future generations, especially in this global South, for the sake of clarity? Sorry of my reading of that, I'm not entirely sure. Do you get what the meaning is there? I think I've lost it a bit.
Yeah, first of all, we are all responsible, right? Blaming the victims, right? That is the typical result, of people who are bereft of, an interest in seriously studying the question and want to provide knee-jerk, reactions to, very serious, challenging matters brought up. Now, how can the people who suffered chattel enslavement, whose rebellions at huge prices reached C.R.R. James on the Haitian Revolution, the Black Jacobins, and see what untold cruelties were visited upon the people of Haiti for daring to challenge chattel enslavement and succeeding in being the first enslaved people in history to overthrow their enslavers and declare control over, the land, right? And let us look at what then has been the response of France. What sacrifices the people of Haiti in terms of so-called reparations to France for freeing themselves from chattel enslavement? Let us look at that. Let us look at the relationship France has today with her colonies in Africa. Their relationship is still colonial, right? As so-called independents were forced to sign on an agreement that colonialism will continue, okay? That is there, it's in the statute. There's so much ignorance, right? And I think that, this arbitrage process will allow many of these things to be brought to inform a lot of people, including those in our communities who have been so miseducated that they're into ignorance, that they don't know these things. That is the point. That the challenge is whether people want to hear the truth, right? And the challenge is whether people really, truly want education to thrive, knowledge, not one which makes you feel comfortable. I mean, are you prepared to face the realities about what the world is today? People think the world today still is run by people who wield white privilege. Where does that white privilege come from? Were people born, and ordained from heaven to have the privileges of whiteness that they have across the world today? How we are in a month, where many will celebrate Columbus as their hero, What did Columbus do? Check what George Monbiot has written about Columbus's crimes against humanity. Okay, but his statue decorates Britain as one of British heroes, right? So people should dare to face this truth. I mean, it is easy to say we are responsible. Certainly, my ancestors were not responsible, right? For chattel enslavement in the form in which it was imposed upon them. I am certainly not responsible for the fact that Britain still imposes upon us a situation in where neocolonialism, tries and impoverishes the vast majority of people. The fact that Johnson, your current prime minister, and those around him are insistent on building Employ 2.0, they have not learned, from the crimes that chattel enslavement and colonization represent. They still want to build another empire, right? As in their response to their Brexit. Why? Why is it that people in this part of it have to live on the resources of other people and deny them access to those resources when you can see their poverty, right? Why is it that our leaders get murdered, right? Anytime we produce leaderships that are capable to stand up and want to promote our interests with a litany of those who have, the list of those who have been murdered, leaders produced by the rebellion of our people across the ages, who have been drowned in pools of blood by, people exercising white privilege instead, right? So I think that trying to escape, or find escapist routes into obscurantism by saying that we are all to blame, only people, blinded by white privilege would make those kinds, or ignorance would make those kinds of statements.
Thank you very much for, I mean, there's quite a lot of comments in the chat saying that obviously more study needs to be done, picking up on what you've been saying, that there is this kind of like white privilege, unconscious, conscious bias, whatever you like to call it. I mean, right now I feel as though as a white person, I've got an illegal prime minister sitting in number 10 right now. So I think that we share a lot of that frustration. I think what I'd like to do now is to say to everyone that we have a frequently asked questions sheet that has been put together, which covers a lot of some of the questions that are coming up, which I'd encourage you all to have a look at. I don't know, Aziz, if you can get that up somewhere on the chat, a link to that. Because what we're going to be doing in the Green Party, we're going to be having a workshop, a further workshop on this on Wednesday at 1840 to 1905, before it comes before plenary, before we vote on this. But at this stage, what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce Cleo Lake to speak on what we can also do locally. So where national government may fail, what we can do is show local leadership. And as a councillor in Lambeth, home to the largest African Caribbean community in the United Kingdom, I'm very proud to say that we managed to get through cross-party support and pass a motion for Lambeth Council to ask the government to do what we're asking the Green Party to do, and that is to create this commission of inquiry for truth and reparatory justice. So Cleo, can I now hand over to you to discuss your take on all of this and your links with what's going on in Bristol. Thanks.
Yes, of course. Good afternoon, everyone. And just to come back on some of the comments, really, and to make some general statements first, if I can, before bringing us up to date. This is about seeking to remedy the harm that continues to be done. And it's a state of being in the world and a condition in the world and an overall systemic poison that ravages, marginalizes, exploits and kills, all for capital gains. This is what we're fighting against. And I also want to give a personal note, and this is coming from a friend actually who was on Twitter. He was sharing, there's a variety of texts that are coming out, some testimonies from people who were enslaved and some from the merchants and the enslavers. And he's a historian, my friend, and he shared a book on Twitter called the Jamaican Diaries of Robert Hibbert, 1772 to 1780, detailing a merchant's family's involvement in and defense of the colonial slave trade based economy. My friend has the surname Hibbert. He is British with Jamaican heritage. And although he loves history, his comments were, just seeing the surname and the reminder of where my own originates from is traumatizing. As someone with a history degree, you would think it might be easy to explore my own personal story, but it isn't. It's actually the most difficult historical subject I've ever approached. When I say approach, I actually mean every now and then I start looking into it and then back away as I can feel my hands shaking and my heartbeat racing. The story should be a book I write, but I struggle to produce even these tweets. To those who say you can't erase history, I know it's in my DNA. And that is the point I want to start with, because some people need way more empathy about the experience we have as African heritage people who've been through that process, who still live with it every single day. And a Haitian friend of mine who has formed a Black Women's Circle group of support, which kind of happened after the second wave of Black Lives Matter, because so many of us are emotionally drained and traumatized, re-traumatized. We listen to each other, and what we say to each other after we speak is, I see you, I hear you, I believe you. And that is what I told my friend on Twitter as well. And that is what I'm asking some of the people here to take on board. I see you, I hear you, I believe you. And of course, this is a particular history with a particular harm, and it's seeping out from under the carpet that so many generations and decades have tried to shove it under. And it needs to be addressed because it's not something that is going away. Somebody mentioned allies. And as well as being part of a group called Countering Colston, some of the people within that group are part of Bristol Radical History Group and fully support the call for reparations and have done much in Bristol to try and decolonise it and put an end to the public celebration of enslavers. And I think something else I've got from Bristol Radical History Group members is also the element of what has happened to people in this country who you might say are white people. Let's remember the workhouse poor if we can. Let's think about allies there within the working class. And let's think as well, the widest part of this movement is actually poverty reparations for me. Anyway, back up to date. And as you heard, I am a counsellor for some of you who don't know that. The element of bringing a atonement and reparations motion through local authorities and councils is a national action that has come about through members of the Green Party and campaigners, i.e. Stop The Maangamizi campaign. So this is a national action, that's important. This came to Bristol as a motion, a developed motion. It came to Bristol in July, and I think some of us may need to understand a little bit about process, because the political systems at a local level in local government can be a little confusing, even for us councillors at times, I must say. So anyway, I should also say that, of course, hopefully you would all have known the news about the toppling of the statue of the infamous enslaver Edward Colston, and that is important in a way because that came before the motion came, although the action for the motion came before that. But it did mean there was significant interest in this motion that was in the papers for the July full council meeting. And although the motion wasn't heard, the press did pick up on it. So the motion wasn't heard in July, and that was the first time it came as a motion. Full council in Bristol is roughly every 6 weeks, and the system is the golden motion rotates between the political parties and a silver motion is pulled out of the hat. And if it is pulled out of the hat, you've got very little time to act on it really. And of course, even if it is pulled out of the hat, you still need to agree as a group what motion is going forward. So luckily, in some ways, in September, we did get the silver motion as the Green Group in Bristol. We were pulled out of the hat, and then we were deciding which motion we would put forward. And really, I'm saying this to you because the actions that need to come next need to come from us as Green Party members. We need to be supporting this action and supporting our councillors, who we hope will be passing similar motions up and down the country. An element of collaboration is an important aspect. In July, there was little engagement with other parties. And again, that could be down to tight timeframes and the process. And I would say through this, it's a learning process, a bit of trial and error. And sometimes you learn as you go. So I've learned through what happened in July, which when we got the silver motion in September, one of the first things I did was actually contact the Labour Deputy Mayor, Councillor Asher Craig, and also the Labour leader, because Labour had the majority in Bristol and a motion would not be passed without their support. That's the reality. And what we want is for the motions to be passed. It is not a political football. It is something that needs to be actioned because we want the All-Party Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry. That is now our #1 aim for the motion, which has been revised.
Neil, thank you very much. Can I ask you to start winding up so that we can just give other people direction on what we can do next? Yeah.
I will attempt to. The motion didn't get heard in September, although it was a silver motion. It didn't get heard. There was, in about the week or 10 days we had to promote that the motion was happening, we did get over 130 statements from the community, which I see as a significant milestone in terms of the interaction with community and the political process in Bristol. Moving forward, there was also some amendments from Labour which came in the night before the full council meeting, which, again, very tight deadlines. What we're doing moving forward is that we've come together as a campaign team to review the motion and make some tweaks to it. The view now is that this will be agreed by the Green Group. It will then be given to Labour for comment. And we feel the best way forward is to actually call an extraordinary full council meeting. So these are just some of the steps. And in between that, of course, the important element is to have a community meeting to also do that groundwork. And this again ties into what we've already heard about, the element of self-determination. And we also do hope that there will be meetings with the Mayor of Bristol and that he will very much get on board. And I would also say that this is something that could also be lobbied towards the LGA, the Local Government Association, and of course, the Association of Green Councillors.
Okay, I'm just very conscious of time. I'm really sorry, but thanks for that. I think that where national government is slow to act, and let's face it, they are going to be knee-deep in a whole bunch of COVID-related stuff. And so getting anything on the statute book, even getting parliamentary time for the motion that we have passed in Lambeth Council, calling on the government to set up a commission of inquiry might take some time. So I think it's imperative that we begin our own reparatory justice process locally. So it's great that you're having these debates in Bristol. It's great that the statute of enslavement has been toppled, because sometimes politicians have to act faster to protect the planet. They have to act faster for justice. And sometimes they're ahead of the politicians. So let's keep up with that. In closing, we've just got about 5 minutes left. What I'd like to do is, there's a lot of stuff coming through in the chat, people saying thank you, I don't know much about this, I'm going to make it my #1 aim to find out more about this. If you look in the if you can all look in the chat, you can see that Cleo's posted the link to the motion that went to Bristol, but further up the chat is the Green Party FAQ about reparations and atonement. Please read page 82 of the agenda, read page 108 of, which is a further explanation, and read the FAQs, which is on that link that Aziz of the Greens of Colour has put up, the link to the living room, and you can see the FAQs, which hopefully will answer a lot of your questions. Hopefully someone will be able to post the fact that we've already successfully passed this motion in Lambeth, and I've actually contacted the clerks of the committees that were sent to, so the Home Affairs Committee, the Women's and Equalities Committee, the Speaker of the House, to check that they have been received by the from the Council, and that trying to encourage them to get it up the agenda. But as Cleo has quite rightly said, we need grassroots people to start putting pressure on our councillors, to start putting pressure on Labour, because as there's a lot of entanglement, as Kofi has made clear, with some of the political parties, and we are now going to continue the work of making sure that newly elected MPs particularly are not bogged down in the quagmire of that House of Commons, that because of the people that received all this compensation, they consolidated their power by many laws that protects and embeds this ring of protection around white colonial power, and that is what needs to be unpicked. So I'd like to encourage everyone to continue reading this, and we'll be revisiting in a workshop all of these, where you'll get more time to tease out your thoughts on all of this. And I hope that we've done enough. As Esther says, it's not been enough time to cover, 270 years and beyond of these issues. But let's do all we can to gain as much support for this motion, to support the Stop The Maangamizi campaign in their quest for a commission of inquiry. But let's, more than anything else, let's act locally and begin to start our own reparatory justice process. We've started in Lambeth already. We are changing the ward names to get rid of enslavers. We're keeping the ward names where there was abolitionists respected. So it is happening, but it needs to happen faster if we're going to repair our planet in time. I think we've only got a couple of minutes left, and there's so many comments coming in. There's still almost 100 people on this call. Thank you everyone for participating. Thank you to Esther, Kofi, to Cleo, to Aziz and the Greens of Colour and the whole team behind that have made this work. And you can see the many people that supported this motion when it was up on the Green Spaces website, and the level of engagement has been astronomical, because people in the Green Party are making the connection between the injustices of the past, the abuse of the few, and the devastating effect that it is having on the many. And this pandemic has made it crystal clear that we share the same planet, and we've got to get our move on to make sure that we can save our species on this earth and the other species that we share the planet with. So I think we'll end it there. Thank you everyone for participating, and thank you to our speakers. And we hope to see the speakers again taking part in the workshop on Wednesday at 6:40 p.m. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you too.
Thank you, Esther.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.